Hi, thanks for coming back to the Story Place. Thanks, I really appreciate it. I'm Anne Marie Battistone, and this is Norfolk Public Access. And I happen to have another Dr. Seuss book. You know, he really was a doctor. I guess he was a pediatrician, and so he, wrote all these books for children. And this is called And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. Now, Mulberry Street is a street in, I believe it's in New York City. It might be in the village, Greenwich Village or nearby, and it has always been an Italian neighborhood. So I don't know if it still is, but it was right in the middle of, and it was near Washington Square, or still is, and yes, Mulberry Street. When I leave home to walk to school, Dad always says to me, Marco, keep your eyelids up and see what you can see. See, Marco is an Italian boy's name. But when I tell him where I've been and what I think I've seen, he looks at me and sternly says, your eyesight's much too keen. Stop telling such outlandish tales. Stop turning minnows into whales. Now, what can I say when I get home today? All the long way to school and all the way back, I've looked and I've kept careful track. But all that I've noticed, except my own feet, was a horse and a wagon on Mulberry Street. That's nothing to tell of. That won't do, of course, just a broken down wagon that's drawn by a horse. That can't be my story. That's only a start. I'll say that a zebra was pulling that cart. And that is a story that no one can beat when I say that I saw it on Mulberry Street. Yes, the zebra is fine, but I think it's a shame such a marvelous beast with a cart that's so tame. The story would really be better to hear if the driver I saw were a charioteer. A golden blue chariot, something to meet, rumbling like thunder down Mulberry Street. No, it won't do at all. A zebra's too small. A reindeer is better. He's fast and he's fleet, and he'd look mighty smart on old Mulberry Street. Hold on a minute, there's something wrong. A reindeer hates the way it feels to pull a thing that runs on wheels. He'd be much happier instead if he could pull a fancy sled. A reindeer and sleigh? Say, anyone could think of that. Jack, Fred, or Joe, or Nat. Say, even Jane could think of that. But it isn't too late to make one little change. A sleigh and an elephant. There's something strange. I'll pick one with plenty of power and size, a blue one with plenty of fun in his eyes, and then just to give him a little more tone, have a Raja with rubies perched high on a throne. Children, when they say tone here, they mean style. They mean style, not sound, but style. Sometimes you hear about people that are tony. That's what he means here. Say, that makes a story that no one can beat when I say that I saw it on Mulberry Street. But now, I don't know. It still doesn't seem right. An elephant pulling a thing that's so light would whip it around like in the air like a kite. But he'd look simply grand with a great big brass band. And here you see the elephant looks, sort of has his eyes shut. He looks very kind of proud. A band that's so good should have someone to hear it, but it's going so fast it's hard to keep near it. I'll put on a trailer. I know they won't mind if a man sits and listens while hitched on behind. But now, is it fair? Is it fair what I've done? I bet those wagons weigh more than a ton, and that's really too heavy a load for one beast. I'll give him some helpers. He needs 2 at least. And there's the Roger you see in that picture. He's he would be a very, very important person in India from a very Tony family, shall we say. But now what worries me is this. Mulberry Street runs into Bliss. Unless there's something I can fix up, there'll be an awful traffic mix-up. It takes police to do the trick, to guide them through where traffic's thick. It takes police to do the trick. They'll never crash now. They'll race at top speed with Sergeant Mulvaney himself in the lead. The mayor is there, and he thinks it is grand, and he raises his hat as they dash by the stand. The mayor is there and the aldermen too, all waving big banners of red, white, and blue. And that is a story that no one can beat when I say that I saw it on Mulberry Street. With a roar of its motor, an airplane appears and dumps out confetti while everyone cheers. And that makes a story that's really not bad, but it still could be better. Suppose that I add a Chinese boy who eats with sticks, a big magician doing tricks, a 10-foot beard that needs a comb. No time for more, I'm almost home. I swung round the corner and dashed through the gate, and I ran up the steps, and I felt simply great. For I had a story that no one could beat, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. But Dad said quite calmly, just draw up your stool and tell me the sights on the way home from school. There was so much to tell, I just couldn't begin. Dad looked at me sharply and pulled at his chin. He frowned at me sternly from there in his seat. Was there nothing to look at, no people to greet? Did nothing excite you or make your heart beat? Nothing, I said, growing red as a beet, but a plain horse and wagon on Mulberry Street. So that book was all about imagination and how happy it makes you, and it doesn't do anybody any harm. Now this book is about a Middle Eastern magician and a dog and a boy. It's called The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi. 6 times Miss Hester's dog Fritz had bitten dear cousin Eunice. So when Miss Hester received an invitation to visit Eunice, she was not surprised to read, P.S. Please leave your dog home. On the day of her visit, Miss Hester asked young Alan Mitz to stay with Fritz and give him his afternoon walk. I hope you enjoy these illustrations, you know, children. I pick the books not just for the stories, but the drawings and the paintings. As soon as Miss Hester left, Fritz ran into the parlor. He loved to chew on the chairs and shake the stuffing out of the pillows. But Alan was ready. All morning long, he kept Fritz from sinking his sharp little teeth into the furniture. Finally, the dog gave up and fell asleep exhausted. Alan took a nap too, but first he hid his hat under his shirt, hats being one of Fritz's favorite things to chew. An hour later, Alan quickly woke when Fritz gave him a bite on the nose. The bad-mannered dog was ready for his afternoon walk. Alan fastened Fritz's leash, and the dog dragged him out of the house. Walking along, they discovered a small white bridge at the side of the road. Alan decided to let Fritz lead the way across. Some distance beyond the bridge, Alan stopped to read a sign. It said, absolutely, positively no dogs allowed in this garden. At the bottom it was signed, Abdul Ghazazi, retired magician. Behind the sign stood a vine-covered wall with an open doorway. Alan took the warning quite seriously. He turned to leave, but as he did, Fritz gave a tremendous tug and snapped right out of his collar. He bolted straight ahead through the open door with Alan running right behind. Fritz, stop, you bad dog, cried Alan, but the dog simply ignored him. Down shadowed paths and across sunlit lawns they raced deeper and deeper into the garden. Finally, Alan grew close enough to grab hold of Fritz, but as he reached out, he slipped and fell. Fritz barked with laughter as he galloped out of sight. Alan slowly picked himself up. He knew he had to find Fritz before Mr. Gazazi discovered him. Bruised and tired, he hurried off in the dog's direction. After a long search, Alan was ready to give up. He was afraid he might never find Fritz. But then he came upon fresh dog prints. Slowly, he followed Fritz's tracks along a path that led into a forest. The dirt path ended and a brick walk began. There were no more tracks to follow, but Alan was certain that Fritz must be just ahead. Alan started running. In front of him, he could see a clearing in the forest. As he came dashing out of the woods, he stopped as quickly as if he had run up against a wall. For there in front of him stood a truly awesome sight. It was the house of Gazazi. Alan nervously climbed the great stairs, convinced that Fritz had come this way and had been captured. The boy's heart was pounding when he arrived at the huge door. He took a deep breath and reached for the bell, but before he touched it, the door swung open. There, in the shadow of the hallway, stood Gazazi the Great. "Greetings, do come in," was all that he said. Now you see this man is wearing a fez. This is a type of hat that was still is, I suppose, popular in the Middle East. And interestingly, the Italian army from many, many years ago also wore fezes with the tassel. I don't know how that happened, but Alan followed Gazazi into a large room. When the magician turned around, Alan quickly apologized for letting Fritz into the garden. He politely asked that if Mr. Gazazi had Fritz, would he please give him back? "Certainly you may have your little Fritzy. Follow me." With those words, he went to the door and led Alan back outside. They were walking across the lawn when suddenly Gazazi stopped by a gathering of ducks. He began to speak in a voice that was more like a growl. "I detest dogs. They dig up my flowers. They chew on my trees. Do you know what I do to dogs I find in my garden?" "What?" whispered Alan, almost afraid to hear the answer. "I turn them into ducks," bellowed Gazazi. In horror, Alan looked at the birds in front of him. When one duck came forward, Gazazi said, "There's your Fritz." Alan begged the magician to change Fritz back. "Impossible," he answered. "Only time can do that. This spell may last years or perhaps just a day. Now take your dear bird and please don't come again." When Alan took the bird in his arms, it tried to give him a bite. "Good old boy," said Alan sadly as he patted the bird on the head. "You really haven't changed so much." With tears in his eyes, he started for home. Behind him, Alan could hear Gazazi laughing. As he approached the stairway, a gust of wind took Alan's hat sailing right off his head. Running along with one arm reaching for the hat, Alan lost his hold on Fritz. The duck flew out ahead and grabbed the hat in midair. But instead of landing, he just kept on flying higher and higher until he disappeared in the afternoon clouds. Alan just stood and stared at the empty sky. "Goodbye, old fellow," he called out sadly, sure that Fritz was gone forever. At least he had something to chew on. Slowly, one step after another, Alan found his way back to the garden gate and over the bridge. It was sunset by the time he reached Miss Hester's. Lights were on and he knew she must be home. With a heavy heart, he approached the door, wondering how Miss Hester would take the news. When Miss Hester came to the door, Alan blurted out his incredible story. He could barely hold back the tears. Then, racing out of the kitchen, with dog food on his nose, came Fritz. Alan couldn't believe his eyes. "I'm afraid Mr. Gazazi played a trick on you," said Miss Hester, trying to hide a smile. "Fritz was in the front yard when I returned. He must have found his own way home while you were with Mr. Gassazi. You see, Alan, no one can really turn dogs into ducks. That old magician just made you think that duck was Fritz." Pretty mean, terrible. Alan felt very silly. He promised himself he'd never be fooled like that again. He was too old to believe in magic. Miss Hester watched from the porch as Alan waved goodbye and hurried down the road to go home. Then she called out to Fritz, who was playfully running around the front yard. He came trotting up the front steps with something in his mouth and dropped it at Miss Hester's feet. "Why, you bad dog, what are you doing with Alan's hat?" So, was the duck a dog all along? Did the duck turn back into a dog? Who knows? So, I thought that was another interesting story about, well, I guess you could call it redemption, which means that redemption is forgiveness and starting over. Alrighty, children, and we're back with another story to explore. And this is another Beatrix Potter. And this story is a very famous story, The Tale of Peter Rabbit. And look at him, he's fell on his bum there trying to skate. Illustrations by Virginia Albert. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. My goodness. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane together to gather blackberries. And there they are. There's a blackberry bush. They've got their pail. And look at those clothes. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. Exactly what he wasn't supposed to do, children. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans. Now, do you think, children, that could be how his father got in trouble? And then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But around the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Now, this frame, I don't know if you know what that is, children, but when people want to grow vegetables sort of out of season, then they have these little boxes, and they have little glass panes in them to let the sun in, and it keeps the vegetables warm so they'll grow and the cold air won't kill them. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop thief!" Peter was dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he'd forgotten the way back to the gate. Now, this must just be, this is I don't know what this drawing is doing here, children. It looks like he's taking some time to read, which isn't part of the story, but somebody just included this nice little drawing anyway. He lost one shoe among the cabbages and the other amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster. Now he's back got his jacket on again, and his little shoes, look how his little shoes are, there's one little shoe, and these, so he has 4 shoes, of course, so there's one shoe left, and you can see it sliding off, see the little strap? So that I think he might, oh, sorry, children. so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. Oh, good Lord. Oh, and he's so frightened, and he's a little tear coming out of his eye. And there are the buttons. So that's sort of a mystery how he's no jacket, then jacket, but let's go on and see. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. And doesn't he look pleased with himself? Oh, he looks like he's on the runway, children. Look at those shoes. And a big smile. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears. Now he has no shoes. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows. Oh my goodness, he's crying. And there's the sparrows looking at him. And he looks as if he's saying, help me. He looks as if he wants to say something. Who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop on the top of Peter. Gee, children, I sort of thought that the birds were going to bite through the net, but no, they wanted him to, not stop crying and take matters into his own little hands. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop on the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his famous jacket behind him. Ooh, he looks happy now. You think, oh, you didn't catch me. I wriggled out of the jacket. He rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. Well, looks like that can, look at the splash he made. The can was full of water. And doesn't Peter look sort of shocked? It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. And here's another picture of Peter under an apple tree, sort of not part of the story, but still nice to look at. He began to turn them over carefully, Mr. McGregor did, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed, "Ch-ch-choo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot on Peter, who, there go the geraniums. Boy, he's had a terrible time. Jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. Those are the geraniums we saw falling over. Peter sat down to rest. He's got his jacket back on. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. Oh, very worried. Very worried indeed. His ears hanging down. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth, she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Oh, my goodness. Oh, dear, he's very, very troubled. Very troubled, looking for help. Peter began to cry. Well, I think he was already crying a little bit already, children, don't you think? Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. Oh, yes. It looks like a Chinese cat, doesn't it? Look at those eyes. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back toward the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over the edge. There's Mr. McGregor, there's the fence, and there's Peter Rabbit watching Mr. McGregor in the field. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Look at that pumpkin, children. Look at that big pumpkin. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him. There's a fence in the back there. Look at his shadow. He's up off the. He's actually in midair, children. Till he got home to the big fir tree. Well, there's a tired boy. Ooh, boy, both of his ears are hanging down. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the foot of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. A fortnight is 2 weeks. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. And here's another little additional picture, and look what he's doing there. He's swinging on a vine, on a flower vine, or I guess, maybe he's just kind of relaxing back into. He's kind of got his legs up. I see. He's not swinging, but there's a couple of stems with thorns, but they don't seem to be bothering him. I am sorry to say he was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 teaspoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. Oh boy, they look like they are enjoying themselves. And you see Peter, there he is, still not doing well and not getting any milk and blackberries. And that, children, is the tale of Peter Rabbit. And thanks very much, children. I hope you'll come back again to the Story Place. I'm Anne Marie Battistone. Hope you like the stories. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.